am here to talk with you guys about the impact of L2 fees on L1 revenue. This is based on a report that I wrote a couple of months ago on this very topic. We're also going to be talking a little bit about what you can expect from EIP 4844, which is the main code change going into the Denkun upgrade. And the Denkun upgrade is the next major upgrade happening on Ethereum in 2 weeks' time. So I actually have a report also on proto-danksharding on EIP 4844. So this presentation is a little bit of an amalgamation of those two reports. So if any of the data and the content that I'm talking to you about today is of interest to you and you want to dig deeper into it, please do check out those reports on the website galaxy.com/research. A quick disclaimer before I start my presentation: everything I'm about to say is not for investment reasons or advice. It is all informational, all for informational purposes. So let's get started by talking about the present outlook, how L2s are being used on Ethereum and a little bit of their activity. As you can see from these charts, the activity on L2s is increasing quite dramatically. The bandwidth and the ability for Ethereum to be able to process a certain number of transactions every second or in a set block has remained quite constant because of the constraints of the Ethereum blockchain and the lack of scalability on Ethereum. But in contrast, as you can see, the activity on L2s and the transaction activity happening on these protocols has really been growing. And that's for two reasons, really. The first is that the adoption of L2s is definitely growing. The popularity of using protocols like Arbitrum and Optimism to transact is definitely becoming more popular. But also, there's just been a ton of more L2s that have launched. Ethereum is one network, but the black line shows the combined activity of layer 2 rollups. And over the last, say, year or so, there's been a ton of new rollup projects that have launched, that are close to launching. Scroll very recently, I think it was last year, or well, we'll have the Scroll team up in a little bit after this talk to talk about their roadmap. But they too are kind of like a new rollup that's starting to process transactions. So the black line, Ethereum has always had this constant limitations for scalability, but one of the reasons why we see the black line growing is not only because of the adoption of existing L2s, but there's just more L2s that are launching, more protocols that you could consider a layer 2 rollup. Let's keep talking about what's happening with L2s right now. L2s are becoming a primary purchaser of the Ethereum block space. Before L2s, the primary people that were using Ethereum and paying for transactions are smart contract developers and end users. If you want to send ETH to another person, you're going to use your EOA, your externally owned account, and send ETH to another person. You're interacting with decentralized finance applications. Uniswap used to be like the top gas guzzler on Etherscan. That's kind of like a page that shows who are the top consumers of gas. Gas is a unit of measurement to measure the computational resources required to execute whatever you want on Ethereum. Obviously, unlike Bitcoin, on Ethereum, there's so many different types of transactions and operations you can do, and each of these operations have different computational resources that they require from nodes, and that's all measured in units of gas. So the fact that the percentage of gas in a block that is used up by an L2, that is paid for by an L2, the fact that it's growing is a really very interesting indicator that the primary purchasers of block space could one day be rollups primarily, as opposed to end users and smart contracts. It's still, not super high right now, and over the last couple months, it's actually been declining. But generally, you can see that, from below 10%, now it's hovering at like 16% of monthly gas used on Ethereum. So this is another kind of interesting chart that illustrates that the activity and the amount of adoption for L2s is growing, and their presence on the Ethereum blockchain, them using Ethereum's resources, the way that L2s are using Ethereum's resources is also growing. Over time. And it's kind of interesting to see, going back to the gas guzzlers page, seeing how L2 sequencers, like for Arbitrum and Optimism, how they also rank extremely high as being some of the top consumers of gas on Ethereum. So let's talk about those two trends and kind of project into the long term. What might happen in the future if adoption and activity for L2s continues to increase? Okay, 8 minutes, great. What happens if it continues to increase? Like I said, you could imagine a future where the primary people that are driving fee revenue, driving revenue to Ethereum are rollups. They're the ones paying for block space on Ethereum. And the whole idea of rollups is that Ethereum right now is just too expensive. And so when you have certain applications that you want to build on Ethereum, it's not possible because every single transaction on Ethereum is just too expensive. So the fact that as adoption for L2s grows, you might see new use cases being unlocked for blockchain-based applications. Maybe certain applications that are possible on blockchains like Solana, say like decentralized public infrastructure, you're able to start running those on L2s that inherit the same level of decentralization and security as Ethereum. So one of the long-term trends that you can think about is that L2s unlock these use cases that were not economically feasible before, but do become feasible across industries like gaming, social media, entertainment, a lot more, and that adoption brings magnitudes more users into crypto. And we're not talking about the degens that have always been in crypto and are just rotating through different airdrops. No. We're talking about mainstream users. And we're talking about, millions of more people. And if you think about all those people and the magnitudes more activity I'm talking about, that's a ton of revenue for the L2, right? That's a ton of people paying for transactions on the L2. And so no matter how cheap the L2 is, the fact that amount of revenue, at least a portion of it, would go back to the L1 because the L2s, again, are paying Ethereum to use that block space, to commit data back down to Ethereum. When you think about an increasing L2 revenue, that part of that revenue also coming back down to Ethereum as rollups become the primary purchasers of block space. This is a very symbiotic relationship. L1 revenue increases as L2 revenue increases. The willingness of L2s to be able to pay more to Ethereum itself to confirm all these transactions, to post data down to Ethereum because they're seeing so much demand on their protocol and they're competing with all these other L2s to get their data batched down, data confirmed down to Ethereum in a timely manner. You can see that L2s really might be able to make it even such that the L1 is so expensive that end users are not even able to really compete and send a transaction because you're competing now with L2 sequencers and L2 layer 2 rollup operations for the block space. So in the long term, you can really see that L2 revenue is could be a positive force for Ethereum L1 because it increases the adoption for blockchain-based applications in general, and it allows the cost of Ethereum's block space to achieve levels that weren't possible before with just the types of use cases that we know and love today with DeFi and NFTs and whatever else we have going on Ethereum right now. So this is a very positive outlook, L2s benefiting L1, making sure that the purchasers of Ethereum's block space over the long term are bringing in new users, bringing in those fees, bringing in that revenue. But in the short term, there's quite a few hurdles before we really get to seeing roll-ups, being able to achieve that vision and being able to unlock those use cases and inherit all those users. The main hurdles that I'm talking about are scalability, decentralization, security, interoperability, composability, and the user experience. It's a little bit of a mouthful. There's a ton that really needs to happen with roll-ups. And I want to get into that with the panel that we're about to get into soon. But rollups themselves are not immune to fee volatility. They also have scalability limitations of their own. Sure, you could be like, oh, well, this rollup is very expensive, tons of fees. Fees are too high on this rollup. Let's just launch a new rollup. But then you get, these problems and these concerns with interoperability between the users and the activity that is on one rollup versus another. We still have so much work that needs to be done with actually enabling fraud proofs, the operations that make the activity on rollups very secure and permissionless. So another kind of big topic and a little bit of a buzzword is this idea of a decentralized sequencer. Sequencers are kind of like block producers on L2s, and the roadmap to being able to achieve decentralized block production on L2s. So there's really quite a few different hurdles that rollups are facing right now that I do believe is a headwind to roll-up adoption, and therefore a headwind to L2 fee revenue in the short term. And combined with all of this idea that fees on L2s might not be as high as we really think it's going to be in the short term, there's also the upgrade, which we're going to talk about now, EIP 4844, that will further reduce the cost of block space for rollups. For users, for us normies that are end users, smart contract developers, the fees are going to stay the same. We're all in the same market here. This mempool, where you submit your pending transactions. But now rollups are going to have a dedicated market just for their own operations, which is primarily data availability. And so they get to enjoy this premier, this dedicated block space for just their operations, and it's going to make fees on L2s a lot cheaper. I was just talking to the Prism team, which is a consensus layer client on Ethereum, and they were saying at a minimum, it's going to make fees 4 times cheaper. Probably a lot higher than that, but at the very minimum. And so if you think about not only the headwinds to roll-up adoption, but also the fact that this upgrade is going to reduce the fees, you can already see that any of the users that would have normally gone to Ethereum to pay their transactions, and now they're going on L2s, they're not paying as much. That revenue from L2s back to Ethereum is not as large, and is frankly not enough to really increase or be a main driver of revenue for Ethereum. So in the short term, layer 2s are expected to reduce, not increase Ethereum's fee revenue. And so this is kind of like a really key point that I think makes the Denkun upgrade, the next upgrade, perhaps not as exciting for the Ethereum community as people think. So let's talk a little bit more about the next upgrade that will, in fact, reduce fees on L2s and also reduce fee revenue from L2s to Ethereum. We already talked about the first two. We talked about how we're creating a dedicated transaction, a specific transaction type, which is called blob transactions. And they give dedicated block space, 128 kilobytes per blob, for rollups to commit down their batch transaction data. And this is a really good feature. I mean, separately, it's just a very good feature to use Ethereum as a data availability layer, because Ethereum has the most robust data availability. It is the most decentralized blockchain, general purpose blockchain out there. It is extremely reliable. It's been a blockchain that's been around for a long time. So if you have data that you want to distribute and give to many different nodes, Ethereum is one of the best networks to do that for. And it just increases kind of the security of the data that you're posting because it's shared by all Ethereum nodes and propagated by all Ethereum nodes. So data availability is a very unique, well, it's something that Ethereum does well. I mean, Ethereum does well on execution too, but topic for a separate talk. So creating dedicated block space for rollups to use DA, and that dedicated block space allows the costs to be reduced because right now rollups are competing with end users, smart contract developers, all for the same, all in the same market. But now they'll have their own separate market, and sometimes, you know, if there's not a lot going on for rollups and there's just really only one rollup that wants to post a blob transaction, who knows, that transaction might even be free, like just almost not negligible gas costs to be able to commit data if there's not a ton of competition in that market, in the blob market. So those are two of the main ones. The third one that I really want to quickly go over is danksharding, full danksharding. Right now, there's a limited number of blobs that can be included per block, but with full danksharding, then you can have data availability sampling and be able to increase the number of blobs that you can include in a block, and so further reduce fees by like multiples more. And I know this bullet says no further changes necessary on the execution layer. Technically, if you want to increase the blob number, you do have to make a change to the execution layer, but if you just want to enable data availability sampling, you don't actually need to change the execution layer. And then the final one is experimentation with ZK proofs. Who knows about the trusted setup ceremony? Did anyone participate in the trusted setup ceremony? Yes, amazing. So these are novel kind of exercises for the Ethereum community to get engaged with, to be able to enable zero-knowledge proofs on Ethereum, and it's a very cool. It's a cool way to start leveraging more cutting-edge technology to improve the privacy and the scalability of Ethereum. So I am a little bit over time, but that is a little bit of an overview of EIP 4844 and some of the benefits. We're going to talk now with our panelists about the L2 roadmap and a little bit deeper on these like hurdles that I'm talking about in the short term for rollup adoption, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into fee revenues. So here are my lovely panelists. Welcome. Welcome.